Hi, all. Thanks so much for joining us. We've got an amazing conversation planned up for today. We're going to be talking all things AI, tech, and DEI, and have some of my favorite folks on to talk about the topic. So we've got joining me, I'm Josh Secrest, Vice President of Client Advocacy out at Paradox. And prior to joining Paradox, was HR leader in TA and talent, both at McDonald's Corporation as well as Abercrombie and Fitch. Joining me is Heather Myers, Chief Psychology Officer out at Traitify. Can't wait to talk to you about your amazing assessment, a great partner to us, as well as Athena Karp, CEO at HiredScore and one of the premier thought leaders within the space. Thank you both for joining.
Thanks for having us, Josh.
Cool. So this is, we've got a lot of ground to cover. So I'm just going to set maybe some ground rules for where we are going to be speaking, maybe where we're not going to be speaking, just because DEI is obviously a big space. And there's a lot to cover even just on the tech side of it. So first off, from a strategic point of view, we are focusing here on mostly recruiting and hiring with a little bit of how that can extend into the internal processes. I know Athena has some really great tools there within her technology, as does Heather. And then it's really looking at technology as a complement and tool in your toolkit within your DEI strategy, not as a silver bullet. So we're going to be talking to that pretty specifically as well as we move our way through talking about this. Because we think it's a kind of an exciting time to be able to leverage technology. But the goal of this session is not to say that this can solve DEI, just that it's going to be an important part of your strategy. So as a part of us kind of getting into this, I'd maybe share my experiences most recently at McDonald's, where I got to participate in us building out our DEI strategy and sit on the employee council to develop that strategy. And what we were seeing over the last year, 2 years, was just this excitement around the innovations in the tech space, from the language we can use in job descriptions to how we were sourcing and getting more accurate with that, to the data that we were being able to start to collect to get smarter, to the tools that we could leverage to make really elegant, personalized experiences, no matter where you are coming in from, to how smart we were able to be as we were starting to think about selecting talent and onboarding talent. So maybe the first question, Athena, like, there just seems to be so much exciting stuff happening. There's so many innovations, so many different ways for DEI to benefit from this HR and TA tech. I guess, why is that? What have you seen, and what's the biggest changes you've seen over the last few years?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the kind of increasing mandate on recruiting and talent management to be a key stakeholder and driver of these business goals. I think we've seen companies verbalize publicly their commitments in a much more kind of clear, transparent, and quantifiable way, actually committing to numbers. X% of our workforce will be, male-female split by 2030, and X% of our workforce is going to double the ability to mirror our local populations we serve by 2025. So I think, Josh, adding numbers and clarity to that, which previously was, we want to do better. Every year we want to do better. We want to close the gaps. Now there's numbers around that. And that means people are taking action. And that means people are driving measurements. And I think the talent acquisition, recruiting role, and talent management, the retention, fair promotion, and stemming the leaking bucket at the back is kind of driving this really exciting revelation that technology and data is critical to your strategy and can support, enable, and unlock, as you said, not be a silver bullet, but help drive that forward. I think there's also an employee awareness of what is the bar that I should expect of my employer to help me and my diverse peers be promoted in a fair, equitable way, but also the social good that we do in the world how are we responding to that? And I think those shifts in sentiments are accelerating in big ways. The boldness and the innovation speed and the broadness of relevancy to what we do in talent acquisition across the org.
I think that's super cool. I think two things stick out. One is this involvement of all of your employees within the hiring process. And I love that as a way to think about, any of the practices or technology that you'd be bringing in is, how would you articulate this? How would you describe this to any employee that asks, can you? And that I think is a really nice way, because AI I think can be sometimes scary, or, we've all heard stories from the past where AI didn't work to an organization's advantage on the DEI front. And I think there's been so many learnings there. But I think that's a really nice way to think through it, is like, hey, how would I articulate this to an employee? The other piece that I saw through thinking about this in retail and then, in restaurants is, how much we are not compartmentalizing, but starting to really think through every single touch point, almost like the candidate through employee journey. And where is it, how can we personalize? How can we make it special? How can we make sure our DE&I initiatives were coming through at each step? And I think that really allowed for us to get to faster places of innovation. Like, hey, is this step something that can be automated? Is this something where a better, more inclusive experience could come through technology? Or is this something where we'd want to be able to make sure that we're putting more hands and more attention on, where technology isn't going to be able to solve it? Yeah, Heather, I wanted to kick it to you, because I think what Traitify does so well is some of the personalization through your tool. Can you kind of talk about maybe the changes that you've seen and how you're looking to make an impact within the DEI space?
Yeah, absolutely, Josh. I think that it's so important to remember that we need to, in organizations, I think are realizing this more and more as they're beginning to really think about what's working and what isn't in their DEI strategies. And that is, we need to make sure that the entire experience from the application process to onboarding to learning and development, growth, team building is something that is personalized to the individual. And it also has to be something that they find interesting and engaging and that they actually want to do. You can have all of these processes that are, very structured and available to everyone. And if no one wants to do them, then there's no point. So at Traitify, as a tech partner, who is an assessment company that works with a lot of partners who are in the AI space as well, we really focus on trying to do our best to make our piece of the candidate experience fun, interesting, engaging, and personalized. So the biggest thing that candidates don't like is being ghosted. Who does? Nobody wants to be ghosted. You don't want to apply for a job and then never hear one way or another. Oftentimes, you don't even know if they got your application. And so that's something that was really important to us as we're putting the assessment in place, which is also, a mobile first assessment. So you can do it on any device and it's visual based. So it's fun, it's engaging. And then there's a feedback piece. So you can give your candidates actual feedback and feedback that's personalized to them. Hey, thank you for taking this assessment. Here are your strengths. They hear something back. They feel good about that. It gives them, they feel like they've been valued and they have some good feedback from the process itself. And then they're less likely to be disgruntled about the whole process because they feel like they've been seen and heard and they're being acknowledged for the things that they, some positive points. And I think that's so important in building this. And then throughout the experience, so once they're onboarded and now you've got this team, and often it's a team that's very diverse in a lot of different ways. And you want to build up their ability to be able to work together as a team. And that's where at the end, once someone's onboarded, we have an Engage tool that provides team building tools and learning and development tools. So they're all personalized to the individual to the teams. And so you really can get this personalization process to help through all of these phases of your process. And I think that is what we're seeing, is people asking for that. So we're seeing our customers want a process where they can give something back to the candidates. You know, they want to have something to do with it after. How do we grow these people? How do we build better teams? How do we get them to work together once they're here? And that's something that I'm seeing much more of a request for over the last couple of years than we had seen before.
I think it's really, really interesting to that point on personalization. I think, you know, maybe you rewind 7-10 years ago, and there was this tension between time and being fast, and handling volume of applicants, and being able to personalize that experience. And it seems like what Traitify and some others are starting to do is be able to do this thing at scale that still feels really personal and warm and inclusive, no matter who you are. And this idea of, oh my gosh, giving candidates feedback, giving new employees feedback. But again, doing it at scale and being able to have that ability, I think kind of welcomes all people in. I think it's a key point that you're touching on too, is this, like, for TA tech to really work and do what you want it to do, you have to be deliberate about, like, what goals you're setting out to address. And I think that comes from the tech providers as well. We should be able to articulate to you, where we fit within the maybe your DEI strategy, and how our tech can help support. From a Paradox perspective, for those who aren't familiar with Paradox, we're a conversational AI. So think of us as almost this layer of communication that's taking a candidate all the way through a hiring process. So from the time they engage with us on your career site, to applying, to asking questions, to getting scheduled through an automated way, to even onboarding and hiring and getting an offer, we're able to automate a lot of that experience and be able to provide not only a personalized experience throughout the journey, but also one that is fair and equitable at scale. And so that's the place where we'd really, as we go into a toolkit, feel that we're able to play and help and support through this standardization, to make sure that how you're engaging with our assistant Olivia is fair and equitable. Athena, we partner a lot. Really want them to be able to hear about HiredScore and all the amazing work you're doing. You actually have a suite of DE&I products, and also are just a leader in the space of how you're using data to be able to inform teams. Can you share a little bit about HiredScore and your approach?
Yeah. So it's interesting, because we set out, when I started the company 8 years ago, to say, how do we use algorithms to make hiring more fair and efficient? And it's that beautiful intersection of, we want the efficiency, but not at the cost of fairness. And we always want fairness, and where it can bring efficiency, that's a double business win. And what that created in the early days was, because our clients are federal government contractors, we needed to actually build the IP for bias testing of algorithms and data balancing automatically, and full explainability and transparency of every algorithmic decision, to show it's job related, to show it's connected to actually the requirements and specifications of the role. So it was, and what we found is that layer actually helps clients, yes, verify that the candidate scoring and sourcing solutions that we bring are fair, which they need to do, right? But it also helps them understand what points in their process are creating differences. And then it's on the client to say, do we like those differences? Are they okay? Is that explainable, or is that defensible? And that's where we saw clients saying, well, actually, there's no silver bullet problem that if we all just solve that, then everything would be great. It's more like, well, in some places, our job descriptions are hindering us from hiring diverse talent. There's been a lot of tools in marketing language, but we built the first tool that says, what in the actual specification is hindering us from hiring diverse talent? And let's stress test, especially preferred qualifications that we know what go-to-market experience, that's not a gender neutral skill. And do we actually need that? And so it's thinking about, I guess, using the data to see different pieces of the problem that didn't have solutions, or addressing slate diversity in a compliant by design way was very hard. They had to choose either see the data or don't see the data, but you can't see the data and make a decision. So how do we mask that in a compliant way? And so a number of ways that we just found the technology was perfect for tackling the problems that had either not good solutions or no solutions at all, and were ailing the companies. So kind of launched that. And I think that the last piece, Josh, has been really exciting is the global definition of this problem of diversity and inclusion takes on a different kind of persona in Brazil versus US versus UK versus India versus Middle East. What are the diverse populations in each country or region? And how is inclusivity defined differently? Some include veterans, some don't. Some include disability groups and definitions, and some don't. So you need to take actually not a global horizontal definition, which doesn't work, but a global definition of every single thing you're using, and right fit that to that population. So that's, I think, we see the most exciting thing to come out of the technology is enabling that.
I love global. I think that's a great term.
It's a real word.
That's so good. I need to be using that. Well, I think it does touch that the inclusivity as a part of your hiring process. One of the pieces I've seen some of our clients doing is they're building their culture storytelling, DEI storytelling into the workflow of Olivia, so that's a big part of the experience. Maybe it's right before you're getting an offer, or maybe it's right before you're coming in for an interview, to be able to tell the specific story of a company. But you can just kind of see how different tech providers, we're starting to get, I just keep coming back to that, the inclusiveness and the personalization that's coming with a lot of our tech. What are you seeing from our those that are buying products, our clients? What are they starting to ask for maybe differently? What's their approach they're taking as they're starting to look at tech? Anything that's you're seeing in that process, Heather?
Yeah, for us, definitely there's an emphasis on transparency. So people want to know how you go from, a score on an assessment to a recommendation of a candidate, for example. They want to know, what is that process? How are those linked? How is that linked to the job? So there's definitely a focus on transparency, and Athena, I'm sure you're seeing that as well, for sure. And then beyond that, it's not, you're seeing people really expecting more than just a one-time thing. So it's not you create a profile and that's the profile and you use that forever, or yep, tackle DE&I, I'm good to go, check it off, let's move on. There's not that sense anymore of, okay, we've checked that box, we can move on. It's an iterative process. And as we've been saying over and over, not to continue to use the same phrase, but there really truly is no silver bullet. As much as we all would like to hope that there would be, there just isn't. And so understanding that, as tech gets better, as the people like Athena, like myself, like you, Josh, as we create products, as we see what's working, what isn't, we change them, we grow. Like that is, I think, what our customers are demanding and requesting, more so than before, where it was just, they just wanted the solution and you to tell them what it was and be done with it. So I think that's for sure what we're seeing, is that, not wanting to just sit there, but to really continue to evolve the process. And Athena, I'm curious as to kind of what you think about that as well, because I'm sure for you, that's true.
Well, technology moves faster than laws, right?
Yeah.
And I'd say the number one most important thing for the clients we work with is that our technology, in moving fast, right? They want a next gen solution that continues to stay atop of its technical game, but it's always doing that in a mindful, cognizant, pre-built for laws manner. And I think the systems in a pre-AI world, when it's just about digital, it's more about enabling the configuration for compliance. Endless configuration, no matter your definition. But AI is not configurable for compliance. And actually, what we see is our clients want the most strict interpretation of the laws today and the laws that we expect to come down the future, pre-built into that AI, and then let them unwind that if they so choose in certain geographies or in certain ways or based on differing companies' definitions of how strictly they follow that. But from the top down, and in doing that, you're relieving a company from the liability, the burden, and the gap of institutional knowledge of what artificial intelligence applied in our specific use case for compliant programs globally means, which people don't have those staffs in-house, nor should they have to, nor can they even fully always understand the use cases, because what we're seeing is the laws are being defined differently for Traitify versus Paradox versus HiredScore. And they want a vendor who is a subject matter expert, as well as leverages the external community and participates in that compliant discussions and debates globally to make sure that they're future-proofing, and especially not launching something that hasn't thought through fully things that apply to them today, right? So I think that's probably the most important change we see. And even employee awareness of that AI. It used to be about their data security and data privacy and how their data was used. It's still, of course, that's there, but companies have built processes and definitions and codes of conduct and ethical, guidelines around that. But about how the AI works and how it's tested, there's even employee awareness of that. And I think that's a new frontier. How does a head of HR, a global head of talent, explain to employees these AIs that they're used, how they're mitigated for bias? And that's where, again, you need to have vendors that can help you speak that language internally, externally, to the stakeholders, and to your candidates, right?
Yeah.
It's a cool point from both sides. I mean, you should be looking for vendors that have that expertise and be able to display that pretty early on within the cycle. And then Heather, I liked where you're going with the organization shows that they're looking at the data. So I think sometimes there's the onus on that company, which certainly, we take some responsibility, but then from the vendor side, being able to see how a vendor's learning and growing from the information they're coming in and being able to recommend best practices or be able to share that. One of the pieces I would always look for from vendors was like how stretchy they were, right now, as well as, their roadmap into the future. So, I would always push to see their roadmap and how they were growing, how they're expanding, how that could continue to like help me within my process. The other piece that I thought was a change probably in the last few years that I think is really exciting is starting to bring in my DEI leads or counterparts into the buy process sooner. So, giving them exposure to some of the like super early demos and getting their thoughts. Is that something that the two of you have seen? And what's the best approach to bringing in your DEI partner if you're a TA lead?
Yeah, we've definitely for sure seen more of that. Even if they don't necessarily bring in that person to that meeting, the DEI kind of leads are consulted, and shown like sometimes there's a video of the demo or something like that, and then they often will send questions our way. So I think that's it's really important, and I think it should be done early in the process to make sure that it's your vendors are being fully vetted by your DEI team and that they understand it, they understand the way that it works. I think both ways, right? So as a vendor, it's great to be able to talk to them early on because there are sometimes these biases against, algorithms or there are concerns. So to be able to address those early is great. And from the, DEI lead perspective, you can actually go in and ask those questions right away before, and help in that selection process, which I think is really vital.
Yep. Heather obviously has a very robust IO and other, processes. So I think there's been a much bigger shift. And we actually encourage our clients, Josh, to follow your model, right? The Josh model of bring that stakeholder in as early as possible, because if they have concerns, if they have customizations, if they have areas, which honestly for vendors, if it's something you've not yet thought of that you could think of, and it could make you more compliant and better your solution, then that's beautiful feedback that you should take, embrace, and incorporate. You just got that for free, right? So I think bringing that stakeholder in very early for them to feel we want to innovate, but we want to innovate safely. And there are governance for safety, and we want to hear all their safety concerns and make sure we, map that out and incorporate that and test that and include that in UAT and include that in launch. And it's just like you wouldn't, go swimming without the lifeguard. Well, they're your lifeguards. So bring them in. Don't bring them in at the very end when you're drowning and they weren't there to save, right?
Yes.
Athena, I think, again, from the corporate side, what I saw a lot of my peers in the space, we'd get excited about some of the technology, and then it's about, selling it and getting others excited about the organization. I think bringing in DEI and early is going to help that. But inevitably, you come across the person in the organization that says, hey, I read X article about how AI in hiring is dangerous, and I'm not sure we should pursue it. Can you just give me, how do you answer that question? How do you kind of prep those team members as they're going in and speaking with other leaders in their organization?
First, I'm glad they read about it. I think that's great. And I want every one of our clients to be reading as much as they can, because there's nothing more important, I think, today than this discussion of how do we use technology with the right ethical guidelines and clarity. So more knowledgeable, the better. I think in our space of talent acquisition, artificial intelligence tools, even HR AI tools, it's kind of everything gets bucketed in this one big bucket called AI tool. And, this notion of how do you help clients put things in the right bucket, right? Is this augmenting existing manual processes that are approved and validated and just giving them a boost? Is this with existing data that is this creating net new data and net new ways of evaluating people? And great news for Heather and Traitify is we have a ages old IO validation process, and that's still here, right? So we're still doing that thing, AI or no AI, that familiar thing called how we govern and how we classify that. And then is this net new data and net new processes that we don't have governance for. And that's where you tend to be in the deepest waters of facial recognition, candidate selection, decisions based on video things. And I think just knowing how to classify that risk for the company and understand the existing things you've used forever in your org that still apply and can still give you that certainty and should be able to be made possible by that vendor, whether there's existing auditors or those companies have built internal tools to produce the results that then you can view in that same similar way. And that last piece is the level, the thing being automated or augmented, and kind of that ethical graph on top of that of the cost of a wrong decision. Is that someone getting fired? Is that, God forbid, and have we thought about that and have we governed that? And is that at least as safe as our human standards? Or is that just a recommendation to a recruiter that they can snooze or say yes to? And I think that the problem with the regulation is it sits big, high level up here, big banner, but it usually doesn't go deep enough. Most of that is the federal guidelines or the international standards like the World Economic Forum or the EU regulations or guidelines that just passed for AI. And then we have some examples that are very specific, like State of Illinois' Video Interview Law Act. And I think sometimes what is what and how do I map all this out becomes very overwhelming. And that's the exercise that we try to work through with our clients to just classify everything properly.
That's super helpful. So we're almost up on time. So to close the discussion out, what's the single biggest benefit AI can have in supporting DEI? Athena, we'll start with you and then go to Heather.
Spoken so much. Single biggest benefit, I think, is helping companies broaden whom are we making sure not to build accommodations for, because people don't really want special treatment, different treatment to stand outside, but whom are we making sure to bring in and include in the right way and assuring are being included. And as that definition expands to all different new types of different, the way that people define different beyond a legal definition of EEO and OFCCP grouping of race and gender to all the different ways that people define that. I think technology makes all those different combinations and the vastness of that and the different methods of making sure we're following that, it makes it possible. And that's what's really exciting for me.
Great. Heather?
So for me, I think it really is the technology that is available now to so many more people, through smartphones, that it's so much more accessible, and this ability to function throughout the employee and candidate life cycle. So to help with selecting a more equitable selection process that leads to a more diverse talent pool, and then tools to help keep that talent pool engaged and focused and working well together as a multi kind of cultural or multi faceted team. That to me is the exciting part, this ability of technology to help throughout that entire process. I think is really, really key.
Well, I think you two know I get pretty energized and excited about the whole space. I love that there are tech partners kind of throughout your entire DEI strategy and playbook that you can partner with. But for me, there's this wonderful piece of personalized, fair experiences at scale that can really help reduce bias. And then what we've talked about a lot today is being able to leverage then data across your entire candidate journey, employee journey, to be able to help keep getting your organization better and improving both in conjunction with your vendors, as well as being able to be really transparent with your organization. I think there's just such a wonderful partnership that's emerging within like AI and DEI. So Heather, Athena, just thanks so much for the time, amazing thoughts. And for everyone listening, just thank you so much for joining us. Any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, as well as reach out to any of us on LinkedIn. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Thanks, Heather.
Thanks, Athena. Thanks, Josh.